My husband smirked as he said, "You're fired. Get out. And drag that broken office chair with you." He bragged that Melissa would take my job and that divorce papers were already waiting. Security pushed me out, laughing. I didn't fight back, because the board meeting I arranged for tomorrow would expose every secret he thought I'd never dare reveal. "You're fired. Get out." Andrew slid the termination letter across his desk like he was discarding trash. Melissa stood beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder, her smile sharp and satisfied. "And drag that broken office chair with you," he added, gesturing to the tilted, worn-out chair in the corner. The one I'd complained about for 6 months. The one that had pinched my back through 18-hour coding sessions while he sat in his $1,500 Herman Miller executive chair. I stood there, staring at my husband of 3 years, my business partner of 3 years, the man who was now erasing me from the company I'd built with my own hands. Melissa, 7 years younger, perfectly polished, wearing a red power suit, smiled wider. "I'm taking over as CTO," she said. "Effective immediately." Security was already walking down the hall. I could hear their radios crackling. But what Andrew didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that my phone had just vibrated in my pocket. The signal I'd been waiting for. 24 hours until the emergency board meeting I'd secretly arranged. 24 hours until they learned exactly what happens when you try to destroy the woman who built everything. I didn't cry. Didn't argue. Didn't give them the breakdown they were clearly expecting. Instead, I walked to that broken chair, gripped its worn armrests, and dragged it across Andrew's polished concrete floors. It made a terrible scraping sound that echoed through the entire office. Every head turned. Every conversation stopped. This was supposed to be my moment of ultimate humiliation. Andrew had choreographed it perfectly. The public firing, the cruel detail about the chair, Melissa standing there as my replacement, security escorting me out like a criminal. But as I pulled that chair past the glass walls where my entire team watched, something crystallized inside me. This wasn't my lowest moment. This was the beginning of his downfall. Because Andrew had forgotten something crucial. I wasn't just some employee he could discard. I was the architect of everything Apex Digital Solutions had become. Every line of code. Every algorithm. Every innovation that made this company worth $23 million had come from my mind, my hands, my sleepless nights. And I had proof of everything he'd done. 3 years ago, none of this seemed possible. 3 years ago, Andrew and I were 2 graduate students at Arizona State University with nothing but ambition and each other. He was getting his MBA, always talking about disrupting industries and building empires. I was finishing my computer science master's degree, writing code that could predict cyber threats before they happened. We met at a campus coffee shop on a Tuesday night. I was debugging a complex algorithm, my 5th cup of coffee going cold beside my laptop. Most people's eyes glazed over when they saw my work. Andrew leaned over my shoulder and said, "Is that a predictive security model?" I looked up, surprised anyone recognized what I was building. He slid into the seat across from me without asking, and we talked until the coffee shop closed. He didn't understand the technical details, he was honest about that. But he understood the business implications immediately. "You're building something that could change how companies think about cybersecurity," he said, his eyes bright with genuine excitement. "Not reactive defense, but predictive protection. That's revolutionary." By our 3rd date, we were sketching out business plans on coffee shop napkins. He'd watch me code past midnight and say, "You're going to change the world, and I'll make sure everyone knows it." I believed him. God, I believed every word. 6 months later, we got married at the Maricopa County Courthouse on a Thursday afternoon. My parents flew in from Michigan. Lebanese immigrants who'd worked 2 jobs each to put me through school. My mother cried through the entire ceremony, clutching my father's arm and whispering prayers in Arabic. Andrew's parents drove over from their Scottsdale estate in a Mercedes that cost more than my parents had earned in 5 years. His mother wore designer sunglasses inside the courthouse and kept checking her phone. At the small lunch afterward, she asked me what I brought to the marriage besides my degree. "Education is valuable, of course," she said, cutting her chicken kebab into precise, small pieces. "But Andrew comes from a family with considerable resources and social standing. I'm simply curious what your contribution will be to this partnership." Andrew had defended me then. Put down his fork and looked his mother in the eye. "Hannah is going to build something that will make our name legendary in tech. Not because of Dad's real estate developments or your country club connections. Because of what her mind can create. I'd loved him so much in that moment. Believed we were building something together where both our names would matter equally. We started Apex Digital Solutions 2 weeks after the wedding, working out of our cramped 2-bedroom apartment in Tempe. The place cost $900 a month, barely affordable even with our combined graduate stipends, and smelled like the previous tenant's dog. But it had 2 bedrooms and we converted the second one into an office. I spent 4 months in that room barely sleeping, surviving on instant ramen and gas station coffee. I wrote every single line of code that became the foundation of our platform. The algorithm was designed to identify cybersecurity threats before they materialized, using machine learning to recognize attack patterns that traditional security systems missed entirely. Andrew worked in the living room, making calls to potential investors, building financial projections, creating pitch presentations. We were a perfect team, I thought. He handled the parts one wasn't good at, and I built the technology that made everything possible. Our first breakthrough came at 3 a.m. on a Saturday. I'd successfully predicted a simulated cyber attack 72 hours before it happened. The algorithm had identified seemingly random network probes that, when analyzed together, revealed a coordinated assault in its planning stages. I ran out of the bedroom practically screaming. Andrew was asleep on our ratty couch, laptop balanced on his chest. It works. Andrew, it actually works. He sat up immediately, alert despite being half asleep. Show me. I walked him through the data, pointing out the pattern recognition, the predictive accuracy, the revolutionary implications. He stared at the screen and I watched understanding dawn across his face. Not technical understanding, he'd never grasped the code itself, but business understanding. Hannah, he said quietly, this is worth millions. This changes everything. Within 6 weeks, he'd secured a meeting with Richard Thornton, a prominent venture capitalist his father knew from their golf club. I prepared a comprehensive technical presentation, practicing my pitch until I could deliver it in my sleep. But when we walked into Richard's sleek downtown Scottsdale office, Andrew did most of the talking. He presented my work with a natural charisma I'd never possessed, translating complex algorithms into language that made investors lean forward with interest. Richard barely glanced at my technical documentation. He watched Andrew, nodding, occasionally interrupting with questions that Andrew handled smoothly. Near the end of the meeting, Richard turned to me almost as an afterthought. Your husband's quite the salesman, he said with an approving smile. You're lucky to have someone who can communicate your technical work in terms investors actually understand. Lucky. That word landed strangely, but I pushed the feeling aside. We got the investment. $1 million in exchange for equity and board representation. I was there when the papers were signed, but I spent most of the meeting waiting in the reception area because Richard's assistant had only prepared 1 chair in the conference room. Just some final details, Andrew had said, kissing my forehead before disappearing inside. Nothing you need to worry about. I'd sat in that reception area for 40 minutes, watching assistants hurry past with important documents, feeling increasingly out of place in my simple dress while everyone else wore expensive suits. That night we celebrated with cheap champagne from Trader Joe's, drinking it straight from the bottle in our apartment. We did it, Andrew said, pulling me close. We actually built something real. We did, I agreed, resting against his chest. But even then something felt slightly wrong. The way he'd said we, while taking sole credit in Richard's office. The way my name had been absent from most of the pitch. The way I'd waited outside like an afterthought while he signed documents that would shape our company's future. I told myself I was being oversensitive. That this was just how business worked. That what mattered was building something meaningful together. The warning signs were there from the beginning. I just refused to see them. The first real crack appeared during an investor presentation 6 months later. Andrew described me as our talented lead developer, instead of co-founder. When I confronted him privately afterward, he laughed it off. It's just positioning for investors who want clear leadership, he said. You know how they are. They need to see a single vision, a single leader. It doesn't change anything about our actual partnership. But it did change things. It changed how people saw me. How they spoke to me. How they valued my contributions. By the time we hired our 10th employee, Andrew was scheduling board meetings without telling me. Making strategic decisions without my input. interrupting me during team meetings to clarify my technical explanations in simpler terms, as if I couldn't communicate my own innovations. I kept telling myself it was normal growing pains. We were scaling fast, and maybe this was just how companies evolved. Maybe I was being paranoid. My best friend Leah tried to warn me. She worked as an accountant for tech startups and had known me since undergrad. One afternoon, she stopped by the office to drop off some documents and saw the new organizational chart Andrew had created. She pulled me aside in the parking lot, her expression serious. "Hannah, you're a co-founder. Why does that chart make you look like a mid-level manager reporting to 3 different people?" I defended him. Said it was just investor optics, meaningless structure for presentations. Leah grabbed my arm. "I've seen this before. Men who start erasing women from the company story don't stop. They keep going until you're completely invisible. And by the time you realize what's happened, you've lost everything." I'd laughed it off. Told her she was being dramatic. But that night, lying awake beside Andrew while he snored peacefully, her words echoed in my head. I couldn't shake the feeling that she'd seen something I was too close to recognize. I pushed the doubts away. Buried myself in work. Told myself that what mattered was the technology, the innovation, the impact we were making. I didn't know then that I was already being systematically erased. That the man I loved was building a narrative where I didn't exist. That by the time I finally saw the truth, he'd already positioned himself to take everything. But now, dragging this broken chair through the office while everyone watched, I understood something Andrew had never considered. The woman who builds the foundation knows exactly how to make it crumble. And tomorrow, at the board meeting he didn't know I'd called, he was going to learn that lesson the hard way. I loaded that broken chair into my trunk and drove straight home. Not to the house I shared with Andrew, but to the small apartment in Tempe I'd rented 2 months earlier under my maiden name. The apartment Andrew didn't know existed. The place was sparse. A desk, 3 monitors, a mattress on the floor, and a mini fridge stocked with energy drinks. This was where I'd been coming every night after Andrew fell asleep, building my case against him piece by piece. I set the chair in the corner of the living room like a trophy and opened my laptop. 24 hours until the board meeting. I needed to review everything one final time, make sure the presentation was airtight. But first I needed to understand how I'd gotten here. How I'd missed the signs so completely. The answer had a name, Melissa Vance. She'd arrived 6 months before my world collapsed. I remember the day Andrew mentioned hiring a chief operating officer like it had been a casual afterthought. "We need someone to help scale operations," he'd said over breakfast one morning, not looking up from his phone. "The company's growing too fast for just the 2 of us to manage everything." I'd been surprised. "Since when are we recruiting for a COO? That's a huge hire." "I've been talking to a few candidates through my network. Nothing serious yet. But if we're going to hit our growth targets, we need operational expertise." The fact that he'd been recruiting without telling me should have been the first red flag. But I was buried in code working on a major platform upgrade that would triple our processing speed. I trusted him to handle hiring decisions. When Melissa came in for her interview, I was actually relieved. She walked into our conference room wearing a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. Her resume was intimidating. Stanford MBA, 5 years at Goldman Sachs, 3 more at a boutique consulting firm that specialized in scaling tech startups. She spoke confidently about operational efficiency, revenue optimization, and strategic growth planning. But what struck me most was simpler than that. She was a woman. Our company was dominated by male developers and salespeople. The only other women were 2 junior developers and our receptionist. I'd felt increasingly isolated as the company grew, the only female voice in leadership meetings where men talked over me constantly. Finally, I'd whispered to Andrew as Melissa presented her vision for restructuring our operations. "Another woman in leadership." He'd nodded, but I didn't see the look that crossed his face. I was too focused on Melissa's presentation. After she left, I turned to Andrew. "She's perfect. She understands operations in a way we desperately need, and having another woman in leadership would be incredible for company culture." "You think we should hire her?" he'd asked, and something in his tone should have warned me. Too eager. Too ready. "Absolutely. I think she could transform how we operate." Andrew had smiled and made the offer that same afternoon. Melissa started 2 weeks later, and within days she'd made her presence known. She reorganized our chaotic filing systems, implemented new project management software, renegotiated our office lease to include a full executive floor. She brought homemade cookies to morning meetings and somehow remembered everyone's birthday. She's amazing, our lead developer Casey told me after Melissa had solved a scheduling conflict that had plagued us for months. Where did you find her? Andrew's network, I'd said, feeling proud that we'd made such a strong hire. I thought I'd found an ally. Someone who understood what it was like to be a woman in tech, fighting for respect in rooms full of men who assumed they were smarter. I was catastrophically wrong. The late nights started about a month after Melissa joined. The first time Andrew had a reasonable excuse. Big investor presentation next week. Melissa's helping me put together the financial projections. The numbers need to be perfect. He'd kissed my forehead around 7 p.m., grabbed his laptop bag and headed back to the office. I'd worked from home that night, debugging a complex authentication issue. Around midnight I'd texted him, "How's it going?" No response. At 2:30 a.m. I'd heard his car in the driveway. He'd slipped into bed quietly and I'd pretended to be asleep. But I'd noticed the smell immediately. Floral perfume that wasn't mine, expensive and distinctive. The next morning I'd asked casually, "Late night?" "Exhausting," he'd said, pouring coffee. But we got the presentation dialed in. Melissa's incredibly sharp with financial modeling. The late nights became a pattern. Board materials. Quarterly planning. Strategic initiatives. Always something urgent that required Andrew and Melissa working together until 2 or 3 in the morning. I'd drive home alone from the office, heat up leftover Chinese food or pizza, and fall asleep on our couch waiting for him. Sometimes I'd wake up when he came in, catching that same floral scent clinging to his clothes. Other times I'd sleep through his arrival and wake up in the morning feeling cold and alone. When I finally worked up the courage to ask about the perfume directly, his response was immediate and sharp. "Are you seriously asking me this right now?" He'd set down his coffee mug hard enough that it cracked against the counter. "Melissa wears perfume, Hannah. Most professional women do. What exactly are you accusing me of?" The way he said it made me feel small. Paranoid. Unreasonable. "I'm not accusing you of anything," I'd said quietly. You're working late every night and I barely see you anymore. We're scaling a company. You of all people should understand that requires sacrifice." He'd softened slightly, pulling me into a hug that felt more obligatory than affectionate. "I know it's hard. But this is temporary. Once we get through this growth phase, things will calm down." I'd believed him because I wanted to believe him. Because admitting the alternative meant admitting my marriage was falling apart. Leah didn't let me avoid the truth as easily. We'd met for coffee one Saturday morning, one of the few times Andrew wasn't at the office with Melissa. I'd been exhausted, running on 4 hours of sleep, and I must have looked as worn down as I felt. "Hannah, you look terrible," Leah had said bluntly, sliding a latte across the table. "When's the last time you slept a full night?" "I'm fine. Just busy with the new platform rollout." "And Andrew? Where's he been?" I'd hesitated. "Working late. We've got a lot of investor pressure right now." "Working late with Melissa?" The way she said the name made me defensive. "They're working on quarterly projections." It's just work." Leah had leaned forward, her expression serious. "Hannah, he's coming home at 3 in the morning smelling like another woman's perfume. That's not paranoia. That's a pattern. You don't understand the pressure we're under. I understand that you're making excuses for behavior that would make any reasonable person suspicious." She'd grabbed my hand across the table. "I've known you since we were 18. You're one of the smartest people I've ever met. But when it comes to Andrew, you're blind." I'd pulled my hand away, angry at her for saying out loud what I didn't want to hear. "He's my husband. We're building this company together. I trust him." "Then you're a fool," she'd said quietly. We'd finished our coffee in uncomfortable silence, and I'd left feeling defensive and unsettled. But her words had planted seeds of doubt I couldn't ignore. The organizational chart appeared 3 months after Melissa joined, presented during a company-wide meeting that Andrew had scheduled without telling me. "We need clearer structure as we scale," Melissa had said, standing at the front of the room with a confident smile. "Investors want to see defined leadership hierarchy and reporting lines." She'd pulled up a slide showing a neat organizational chart. At the top, Andrew Hartwell, CEO. Directly below him, Melissa Vance, COO. And then various departments branching off. I'd scanned the chart looking for my name, my title, my position as co-founder. There, tucked away on the left side, 3 levels down. A small box labeled Technical Lead Hannah Karim, with a dotted line reporting to Melissa. Not co-founder. Not CTO. Technical lead. A middle management title that suggested I was just another employee. I'd felt the blood drain from my face as everyone in the room studied the chart. Casey glanced at me with confusion. Other developers whispered to each other. Any questions? Melissa had asked brightly. I'd stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. I have a question. Where's my co-founder title on this chart? The room went silent. Melissa's smile had faltered slightly. Hannah, this is just for investor presentations. It's about showing clear operational structure. I'm a co-founder of this company. I built the entire platform. And you've positioned me as a mid-level manager reporting to you. Andrew had stood up then, his voice calm and patronizing. Hannah, let's discuss this privately. No. I'd felt something break inside me. Everyone here knows I founded this company with you. I wrote every line of code. And now you're erasing me from the organizational structure. You're being dramatic, Andrew had said, and the way he said it, like I was an unreasonable child throwing a tantrum, made me want to scream. But I'd looked around the room and seen the expressions on people's faces. Some sympathetic. Others uncomfortable. A few, the newer employees who only knew Andrew's version of our story, looked confused, like they couldn't understand why the technical lead was making such a fuss. I'd walked out of that meeting and gone straight to Andrew's office. He'd followed me in and closed the door. That was unprofessional. I'm a co-founder, I'd said, my voice shaking. There shouldn't be hierarchy between us. He'd leaned back in his expensive Herman Miller chair, the $1,500 one he'd purchased while I still sat in a broken chair that tilted dangerously to the left, and studied me like I was a problem to be managed. It's just for presentations, Hannah. Investors want to see clear structure. This doesn't change our partnership. It changes everything, I'd said. That chart becomes reality. New employees will treat me like I'm just another manager instead of a founder. Melissa will think she has authority over me. Melissa is CEO. She does have operational authority. Over me. Over the person who built everything this company is based on. Over technical operations, yes. He'd stood up, walking around the desk to stand too close to me. Hannah, you're brilliant with code. Nobody's questioning that. But companies need structure. They need clear leadership. And right now, the leadership investors want to see is me at the top, Melissa handling operations, and you doing what you do best, building technology. The dismissal in his voice had been crushing. Like my role was small. Manageable. Replaceable. I'd left his office feeling like I'd just lost a fight I didn't know I was having. That organizational chart became gospel. New hires started calling Melissa their boss. She began scheduling meetings without inviting me, making decisions about technical timelines without consulting me. And Andrew stopped including me in board communications entirely. I was being erased from my own company, and it was happening so gradually that by the time I fully understood what was occurring, the damage was already done. The moment I knew for certain came on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I'd walked into Andrew's office to ask about a technical decision, something routine, a question that should have taken 30 seconds. The door was ajar, so I'd pushed it open. Melissa was there, standing beside Andrew's desk, leaning over his computer screen. They were close, too close, their shoulders touching as they reviewed something together. The air was thick with her perfume. That same expensive floral scent I'd been smelling on Andrew's clothes for months. They jumped apart when I entered, but not quickly enough. I'd seen everything in that split second. The way her hand had been resting on his arm, the way he'd been looking at her with an intimacy I recognized because he used to look at me that way. Hannah, Andrew had said, his voice too loud, too forced. We were just reviewing the investor deck for the Series B pitch. Your husband has such brilliant strategic instincts, Melissa had added smoothly, adjusting her blazer. He's been teaching me so much about managing board relationships. The lie sat between us, obvious and ugly. I'd mumbled something about checking back later and left, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might be sick. That night, after Andrew came home at 11, earlier than usual, probably feeling guilty, I waited until he got in the shower. Then I did something I'd never done before. I opened his laptop. My hands trembled as I entered Andrew's password. The laptop sat on my knees in our locked bathroom, the shower still running behind the closed door. I had maybe 10 minutes before he'd finish and wonder where I'd gone. The desktop loaded, showing the usual array of folders and applications. My heart hammered against my ribs as I opened his browser, half expecting him to have deleted everything. But Andrew was arrogant. He'd never considered that I might look. His browsing history stretched back months, an unfiltered record of everything he'd been planning while lying beside me each night. The first thing I found were real estate searches. Not just casual browsing, saved listings with detailed notes. Luxury condos in downtown Phoenix with floor-to-ceiling windows and rooftop infinity pools. 3-bedroom units priced between $800,000 and $1.2 million. I clicked through them one by one, my stomach twisting tighter with each page. Good location for entertaining investors, read one note. Close to the new office expansion, said another. And then on a penthouse listing with panoramic city views. Melissa approved this one. Move-in ready by March. March was 3 months away. None of the notes mentioned me. Not a single reference to our new place, or Hannah would like the kitchen. These weren't homes he was considering for us. This was his future. His and Melissa's. The shower turned off. I heard Andrew actually humming as he reached for a towel. My hands moved faster, clicking through his calendar application. The appointments I found made everything crystallize into horrible clarity. Tuesday, 2 p.m., property viewing Meridian Tower. That was the same Tuesday he texted me saying he had a meeting with potential Series B investors. Thursday, 4 p.m., viewing Roosevelt Lofts. I remembered that day. He'd called saying the meeting was running long and he'd grab dinner downtown. Saturday, 11 a.m., final walk through Penthouse 4B. Last Saturday, when he told me he had an emergency board prep session. Every viewing had a second attendee listed, Melissa Vance. I clicked on his messages, finding a thread with her that went back months. Melissa, loved the penthouse. Perfect for what we discussed. 3 bedrooms gives us the space we'll need. Andrew, agreed. I'll make an offer this week. Timeline still looking good for March move-in, right after everything's finalized. Melissa, as long as we stick to the plan. The timing has to be perfect. Andrew, don't worry. I've got it handled. She won't see it coming. Not Hannah. Not my wife. Just she, like I was an obstacle to be managed rather than a person they were destroying. I heard the bathroom door handle rattle. Hannah? You in there? Just a minute, I called out, my voice remarkably steady. I took rapid screenshots with my phone, the camera shutter sound muted, capturing every damning message. Everything okay? Fine. Just finishing up. I closed the browser windows, clearing the history of my snooping but not his actual browsing data. Then I opened a random news article so the laptop would look like I'd just been reading. When I unlocked the door, Andrew stood there in his pajama pants, hair damp from the shower. He looked at the laptop in my hands. Needed to check something for work, I said casually. My laptop's downstairs. He nodded, not suspicious. Why would he be? I'd never given him reason to doubt my trust before. That night I couldn't sleep. While Andrew snored peacefully beside me, the sleep of someone who had no idea his secrets were unraveling, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through everything I'd discovered. At 2 a.m. I gave up pretending. I slipped out of bed, grabbed his laptop from the living room and locked myself in our home office. If he was planning to destroy me, I needed to know exactly how deep this went. I bypassed his main financial folders. Those would be sanitized, showing only what he wanted visible. Instead, I dug deeper, looking for hidden directories and archived files that most people forgot existed. That's where I found them. Financial records he'd moved to an obscure backup folder, probably thinking they were safely buried. Wire transfers to companies I'd never heard of. Tech Consult Solutions. Strategic Growth Partners. Meridian Advisory Group. Each one receiving regular payments ranging from $10,000 to $25,000, all categorized as operational consulting fees. I opened a new browser tab and searched for Tech Consult Solutions. The website looked professional enough at first glance. Generic stock photos of diverse business people in meetings, vague language about strategic business optimization. But the address listed in the footer made my blood run cold. It was in Mesa. The same address Melissa had listed on her employment paperwork as her emergency contact. Her cousin's house. I searched the other companies. Strategic Growth Partners traced back to a Scottsdale address I recognized. Andrew's college roommate Marcus owned a law practice there. Meridian Advisory Group had no physical address at all, just a registered agent in Delaware. They were shell companies. Fake businesses set up to funnel money out of Apex Digital Solutions and into Andrew's and Melissa's pockets. I pulled up our company's bank records. I still had access to those, though Andrew probably assumed I never looked at them. Transaction by transaction I traced the theft. March, $15,000 to Tech Consult Solutions for Market Analysis Consulting. April, $12,000 to Strategic Growth Partners for Legal Advisory Services. May, $20,000 to Meridian Advisory Group for Operational Efficiency Assessment. Month after month, systematic theft disguised as legitimate business expenses. I pulled up a calculator and started adding. Over 18 months, they'd stolen $387,000. Not enough to bankrupt the company or trigger immediate red flags during quarterly reviews. But steady, consistent embezzlement that added up to a fortune. My hands shook as I took screenshot after screenshot, uploading each one to a cloud storage account I'd created using my maiden name. I cleared browser histories, closed windows, made sure everything looked untouched. When I crawled back into bed at 4 a.m, I didn't feel hurt anymore. That emotion had burned away, leaving something colder and harder in its place. Andrew stirred beside me, draping an arm across my waist in his sleep. The casual intimacy of the gesture made my skin crawl. This man, who I'd loved, trusted, built a life with, had been systematically stealing from me while planning to throw me away like garbage. I lay there in the dark, his arm heavy across my body, and let the rage crystallize into something useful. Something strategic. The next morning I called Leah before Andrew woke up. "Can you meet me? Today. It's urgent." She heard something in my voice. "Give me an address. I'll be there in 30 minutes. I chose a coffee shop in Gilbert, far enough from our usual haunts that we wouldn't run into anyone from work. When Leah arrived, I was already at a corner table, my phone face down on the table between us. "What happened?" she asked, sliding into the seat across from me. I unlocked my phone and handed it to her without saying anything. Let her see the screenshots. The real estate searches, the messages with Melissa, the financial records showing months of theft. Her face went pale as she scrolled through the images. When she finally looked up, her expression was a mixture of fury and pity. "Hannah, this isn't just an affair. This is criminal fraud. They're embezzling from your own company." "I know," I said, and my voice sounded strange to my own ears. Flat. Empty of the emotion churning underneath. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know. That's why I called you." Leah set the phone down carefully like it might explode. "You need more than this. Screenshots can be dismissed, explained away. You need original documents, corporate records, anything that proves these shell companies are fake and that Andrew and Melissa are behind them. How do I get that without them knowing?" Carefully. She leaned forward, her voice dropping even though we were alone in our corner. "Hannah, you need to understand what's happening here. Andrew isn't planning to leave you and run away with Melissa. He's planning to take everything you've built and make you disappear from the narrative entirely. The divorce papers are probably already drafted. The ownership transfer documents are probably ready to file." I'd suspected this, but hearing Leah say it out loud made it real in a way I'd been avoiding. "He's going to force me out." "He's already forcing you out. The organizational chart that erased your co-founder title? That was step 1. Making you look like an employee instead of an owner. Once the board and investors see you that way, it's easier to terminate you. But I own 48% of the company." "Do you?" Leah asked quietly. "Have you checked the actual corporate filings recently? Because if Andrew's been planning this for months, I guarantee he's already started tampering with ownership documents." The coffee shop suddenly felt too hot, too small. How would he even do that? Marcus, Andrew's lawyer friend who's helping with the shell companies? He'd be the one filing amended ownership documents with the state, forging your signature on transfer agreements. It's all digital now. If you're not actively monitoring it, you wouldn't even know it happened until it was too late. I felt sick. I need to check the state business registry. Yes. Tonight. And Hannah. She grabbed my hand across the table, her grip tight enough to hurt. You need to move faster than he is. Document everything, but don't confront him yet. If he knows you're onto him, he'll accelerate his timeline. You need to stay invisible while you build your case. Invisible, I repeated. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd been made invisible in my own company for months. Now I needed to become a ghost by choice. That evening I went to the office and acted like nothing had changed. Smiled at Melissa when she explained the new budget process she and Andrew had developed without consulting me. Nodded when Andrew talked about our growth projections in terms that completely ignored the platform upgrades I'd been building. But after everyone left, I stayed late. Went into Andrew's office and accessed the corporate filing cabinet he thought was secure. Inside, I found copies of our original incorporation documents, investment agreements, board minutes. I photographed everything with my phone, working quickly and methodically. Then I went to my own desk and started pulling code repositories, commit histories, email chains from our early days that proved I'd built the entire platform alone. Every piece of evidence that showed my authorship, my innovation, my role as the true architect of Apex Digital Solutions. I bought a small voice recorder the next day from an electronics store, paying cash. Over the following weeks I recorded everything. Andrew presenting my security algorithms to investors as team innovations guided by his strategic vision. Melissa telling new hires that Andrew was the genius behind our success. I became a ghost in my own company, documenting my own erasure while they celebrated what they thought was their victory. And every night, in my secret apartment that Andrew didn't know existed, I built the presentation that would destroy them both. They'd underestimated me completely. Assumed I was too trusting, too naive, too focused on code to notice what they were doing. They were about to learn exactly how wrong they were. The voice recordings were damning, but I needed something more. Something Andrew couldn't talk his way around with charm and connections. I needed hard proof that he'd committed fraud, documentation so clear that even his father's golf club friends couldn't ignore it. That proof existed somewhere in the corporate filings and I needed to find it. The problem was access. Andrew controlled most of our official corporate documents, keeping them in a locked filing cabinet in his office. But there was one person who would have copies of everything from the beginning. Richard Thornton, our first major investor. I drafted the email carefully, trying to sound casual rather than desperate. Asterisk, Hi Richard, I'm reviewing our corporate governance structure as we prepare for some potential new investors. Could you send me copies of the original investment documents and incorporation papers? I seem to have misplaced my files during our last office move. Thanks so much. Sis. I hit send before I could second-guess myself, then stared at my inbox, refreshing compulsively. Richard responded within an hour. Of course, Hannah. Attached are all the original term sheets, incorporation documents, and board agreements from our Series A. Let me know if you need anything else. My hands trembled as I opened the attachments. PDF after PDF loaded on my screen. Documents I'd signed 3 years ago when everything was new and full of promise. The original incorporation papers were dated January 15th, 3 years ago. Right there on page 3, under Founding Members and Equity Distribution. Hannah Karim, 50% ownership, co-founder, Chief Technology Officer. Andrew Hartwell, 50% ownership, co-founder, Chief Executive Officer. Equal. We'd been equal partners. I'd known this, of course, but seeing it in black and white made something twist in my chest. This was what we'd agreed to. What we'd built together. I opened the State Business Registry website and pulled up Apex Digital Solutions' current corporate filing. The one that was supposed to be public record, showing our official ownership structure. The document had been last updated 6 months ago. Filed by Marcus Brennan on behalf of the company. I scrolled down to the ownership section and my vision blurred. Hannah Karim, 35% ownership, technical lead. Andrew Hartwell, 45% ownership, Chief Executive Officer. Melissa Vance, 20% ownership, Chief Operating Officer. Not co-founder. Technical lead. And my 50% had been reduced to 35. According to the filing, I'd signed ownership transfer documents on March 12th, agreeing to dilute my shares to bring in Melissa as a strategic partner with 20% equity. I'd never signed anything like that. March 12th was 6 months ago. I'd been in San Francisco that entire week at a cybersecurity conference, presenting our platform to potential enterprise clients. I downloaded the transfer documents attached to the state filing and zoomed in on the signature line. There was my name, signed in flowing script that looked vaguely like my handwriting but wasn't quite right. It was too looped. The in Kareem was too angular. Someone had tried to forge my signature, but they hadn't been particularly careful about it. I pulled up other documents I'd actually signed. Employment agreements, vendor contracts, office lease renewals. My real signature was there for comparison and the differences were obvious. The forged document wasn't even close. Andrew had committed securities fraud. Forged my signature to illegally transfer corporate ownership. And he'd been so arrogant, so certain I'd never check, that he hadn't even bothered to make it convincing. I sat back in my chair at the secret apartment, staring at the two documents side by side on my monitor. Original filing showing 50-50 ownership. Current filing showing I'd been diluted to 35% through documents I'd never signed. This was it. The smoking gun. Even if Andrew could explain away the affair, even if he could justify the late nights and the real estate searches, he couldn't explain this. This was black and white proof of fraud. I saved everything to my encrypted cloud storage, then made 3 additional backup copies on separate drives. This evidence couldn't disappear. My phone rang, startling me. Leah's name flashed on the screen. "Did you find something?" she asked immediately. Andrew forged my signature to transfer 15% of my ownership to Melissa. "It's filed with the state. The forgery is obvious. It doesn't even match my actual signature." Leah was quiet for a moment. "Hannah, that's a felony. Securities fraud, forgery, he could face criminal charges." "I know. Are you ready for that? For what happens when you expose this?" I thought about Andrew's face that morning at breakfast, smiling at me while planning my destruction. Thought about Melissa standing in his office with her hand on his shoulder. Thought about that organizational chart that had erased me from my own company. "Yes," I said. "I'm ready." But I wasn't just ready, I was determined. And determination required a plan. That afternoon I called Sandra Westbrook, a lawyer whose name Leah had given me. She specialized in high-asset divorces and business disputes, with a reputation for being ruthlessly effective. Her office was in North Scottsdale, all glass and steel and expensive art. When I walked in carrying a laptop bag full of evidence, she studied me with sharp eyes. "You're Hannah Kareem," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes. I looked up your company after you called. Apex Digital Solutions. $23 million valuation. Impressive. It's built on technology one created. Then let's make sure you keep it." I spent the next 2 hours walking her through everything. The affair. The embezzlement. The forged ownership documents. The real estate searches showing Andrew and Melissa planning a future together. Sandra took notes without interrupting, her expression growing more serious with each revelation. When I finished, she set down her pen and leaned back in her leather chair. "Hannah, you understand this isn't just a divorce case. This is corporate warfare. Your husband isn't just leaving you, he's trying to steal your company while destroying your marriage simultaneously." "I know. Arizona is a community property state. Everything acquired during marriage should be split 50-50. But Andrew has been systematically repositioning assets to make it look like he owns the company and you're just an employee. If we're not strategic, you could walk away with almost nothing despite building everything." The words confirmed my worst fears, but hearing them from a lawyer made them real in a way I'd been avoiding. "What do I do?" Sandra smiled, and it wasn't a warm expression. "We strike first. We strike hard. And we strike with overwhelming evidence. You don't have just a divorce case, you have a fraud case. Maybe even a criminal case if the district attorney's office gets interested." "I want the company," I said. "Not half of it. All of it. Andrew doesn't get to steal what I built." "Then we need to move fast." "Has he filed divorce papers yet?" "I don't think so. But based on the messages I found, he's planning to file right after forcing me out of the company. He wants to make it look like I was just an employee, so I have no claim to the business in the divorce." Sandra nodded. "Classic strategy. Diminish your role, then divorce you before you realize how thoroughly you've been screwed." She opened her laptop and started typing. "Here's what we're going to do. You're going to call an emergency board meeting using your original co-founder authority. Can I still do that? Even with the forged documents showing reduced ownership. The forged documents are fraudulent, which means they're invalid. Your original 50% ownership still stands legally. And as a co-founder, you have rights outlined in your original shareholders' agreement that can't be stripped without your genuine consent. Hope flickered in my chest for the first time in weeks. So I can call a board meeting? You can and you will. You're going to present every piece of evidence to the board. The fraud, the embezzlement, the conspiracy. And you're going to request immediate termination of Andrew and Melissa, with full investigation into criminal charges. What if the board sides with Andrew? Sandra's smile turned sharp. With the evidence you have, they'd be idiots to side with him. And if they do, we take this to the district attorney and the media. Tech COO commits securities fraud and embezzles from his own company makes for a very interesting headline. Over the next 2 weeks, I lived a double life. During the day, I went to the office and pretended everything was normal. Smiled at Andrew over breakfast. Attended meetings where Melissa explained strategies she'd developed